In addition to there being certain attitudes that we need to avoid in apologetics, there are also certain practices that we need to avoid in apologetics. One of them, and this is especially a tendency among newer apologists, is data dumping. There can be a real temptation to try to just overwhelm other people with large amounts of data. For example, you may have 30 Bible verses that you think prove something, and the thing to do is list all of them for the person you're dealing with. Well, that's actually not a good idea. 30 verses, or even a lot fewer than 30 verses, will exceed the attention span of the person that you're trying to serve. And once their attention span is exceeded, they are going to stop thinking about the arguments and the evidence you're presenting them, and they're going to start thinking about the fact that you're wasting their time. They're going to be bored, and it's actually going to create additional barriers between them and the positions that you're hoping they're going to adopt. It's much better to give them one verse that proves your position, or two or three really strong verses. This is a case where less really is more. Also, there can be a tendency when you have lots of verses to want to show off your knowledge of all of these verses, and that attitude of showing off can come through. In addition, the person will perceive it as, I'm being bludgeoned by this other person who's just dumping all of this data on me. They're not treating me seriously. They're not presenting information to me the way they would want information presented to them. They don't want a cascade of pieces of information dumped on them with no time to think and consider about it. And in the same way, I don't want that done to me. So if you sense that you're starting to overload a person in a conversation or in writing, then you need to back off. Less really is more. Stick with your stronger, fewer arguments, and proceed a piece at a time. Don't try to dominate the conversation. Don't try to overwhelm another person. Another related approach is what I sometimes call buckshot apologetics. Here, you do have a lot of different arguments that you're presenting to someone, but they're not all on the same subject. Instead of 30 Bible verses to prove one point, it'll be 30 Bible verses to prove 15 different points. Well, people don't like conversations that aren't focused. They don't like people shifting topics rapidly before they've had a chance to think about and weigh in on the topic under discussion. I mean, if you're talking to someone and you're making a point to them, and then they suddenly shift the topic to something else, it becomes very frustrating. And it can even communicate the idea that the position you're advocating is weak. If you can't stick to the subject and talk about the subject under discussion, if you must move on to something else, then that can be a sign that your position is actually weak. And so the buckshot apologetic approach is one that you want to avoid, both because it's frustrating and because it can communicate the idea that your position is a weak one. Otherwise, if you had a strong position, why couldn't you stay and talk about the subject that we were already discussing? Another practice that needs to be avoided is faking an answer. This is something that can be a real temptation at times when you're in a conversation and someone brings up a point and you don't know, or asks a question and you don't know how to answer it. In the heat of the moment, it can be tempting to try to cobble something together even though you don't really know what the answer is. And that can be problematic. One reason it can be problematic is because on-the-fly answers frequently are not that accurate. You can be wrong, you can be mistaken, especially if you're being asked about something, let's say, concerning history, and you try to fake an answer. The historical facts may not be what you assume they are. If you don't really know what happened, then you should not be saying, oh, well, this is what happened, because the other person may do some research and the answer you gave can come back and bite you. In addition, faking an answer frequently involves, as you come up with it on the fly, you don't phrase it as well as you could. And it can come across as tentative and hesitant. At times, there is an attempt, I see with some folks who are trying to formulate an answer on the fly, to talk around an issue, hoping they eventually land on an answer that addresses it directly. But the fact that they feel the need to, instead of just saying, here's the answer, the fact they feel the need to talk around the general subject and hopefully eventually zero in is a sign to the person they're dealing with that they don't really know the answer. If they knew the answer, they could just say, this is it. But if they have to go on an elaborate discussion of related matters, then that's a sign they don't really know the answer, and they're just coming up with one as best they can. And that communicates a lack of knowledge, and it can also communicate a lack of confidence. Rather than faking an answer, by far, the better thing to do is say, I'd have to do some research on that. Just admit it. You don't have to say, I don't know. You can say, I don't know, but, I'd have to research that. And if it's something that the person cares about, say, I'll be happy to research that and get back to you, and then make sure you do. And what that communicates to the person is you have the integrity and the honesty to admit when you don't know something, and it also shows you're trying to be helpful to the other person. So rather than faking an answer, just admit that you'd have to do some checking and then be willing to do that checking if it's something the person is really interested in. Another attitude and practice that we need to avoid is having an unhealthy attachment to winning and trying to win, trying to get someone to change their opinion in front of you. This is something that very rarely happens, especially on important matters. People don't change their minds on really important matters like what religion should I be on a dime. For really important matters, they want to think about it, they want to go off and study it and contemplate it and pray about it. And that means that the more important the issue is, the less likely it is that someone's going to change his opinion in front of you. And that means you shouldn't try to get him to change his opinion in front of you. You should give him the space that he needs to think through an issue properly. It may not be something as important as what religion should I be. It may be, some issue within a religious context, some smaller issue. But the more important it is, the less likely the person is to change in front of you, and you need to respect them and give them space. Do not pressure them to change their opinion in front of you. Show them respect. You would not want to be pressured and have the expectation that you need to change your opinion right at the moment. You would want to be able to go think about it. And so you should show the same respect to the other person. If you do get a fascination with winning, and that becomes a priority for you, you're in a problematic situation as an apologist. There's a common saying that you can win an argument but lose a soul. More frequently, you're losing both the argument and the soul. You may think you've made the better case, but you didn't actually convince the person. The person perceived that you were just trying to win and that you weren't genuinely trying to serve, because people who are trying to win are in an adversarial role. If you're trying to win with respect to somebody, if you're trying to win an argument, then you have become that person's adversary. You're not their friend. You're a combatant with that person. And so you will be received as such. The person will get defensive. The person will become more entrenched in their positions and less likely to listen to you. Instead of focusing on the arguments and evidence that you're presenting, the person is going to be focusing on the fact that they're under attack by you. And you are not serving a person in that situation. What you need to do is do your best to just back off. Don't worry about winning. Don't worry about getting a person to change his mind in front of you. Just offer helpful thoughts to the person. Here's some arguments. Here's some evidence that you may want to think about. Let the person have the space and the time that they need, and don't think that it all comes down to this conversation. Your job is not converting a person. That's the Holy Spirit's job. It does not all depend on you. God has millions of ways to reach every individual person. You are just one of those ways. This conversation you're having, whether it's in person or online or whatever it may be, this is just one moment in that person's life. Do not assume the responsibility for converting this person or changing this person's mind. Just live in the moment and do what you can to be helpful and trust God with the results.
If you enjoyed learning how to explain and defend our Catholic faith, make sure you check out the School of Apologetics. In our self-paced courses, Jimmy Akin teaches the fundamentals of apologetic dialogue. Trent Horn shows how to defend life beginning at conception. On top of that, other trusted experts give courses on church history, creation, purgatory, the saints, and more. Sign up today because a faith you can defend is a faith you can own and embrace. SchoolofApologetics.com.